What's going on, guys? This is going to be a little bit of a different video. It's going to be laid out more like a typical YouTube video instead of gameplay. For the most part, there will be an example toward the end. I'm going to be covering a lot of material in this video that can help make you a better player at Search and Destroy. It's going to be laid out in sections. I'm going to have timestamps in the description if you want to jump around to topics that you care more about, if you're already confident and content with your performance in Search. The first section is going to be playstyle. So the first thing that you need to evaluate about yourself is the type of playstyle that you're aiming to play. As you get better, you'll find yourself adapting your game on the fly during a match, but if you're not consistently doing good in your matches, you should aim to master a certain style of play before branching out to others. You can technically play any way you want, but most successful playstyles fall into about three broad categories. You have a rushing playstyle, which is usually people playing aggressively and looking to flank the other team. You have what I'm going to call an anchor playstyle, which is where you try to hold map control or a power position to limit the opponent's team from being able to really maneuver around the map. And then you have what I'm going to call lockdown playstyles, which is where you're holding very niche or critical lines of sight to control the map in places that are not natural chokes in the map. And that'll make a little bit more sense when I get to the example of that playstyle. Now, these categories are a bit broad, but they pretty much cover every playstyle you'll realistically use or see. Generally speaking, unless you're a lockdown player, you should always be sprinting from the start of the game, no matter what your playstyle is. Rushing and fighting for map control is arguably the most important skill in Search, and the team who gets dominant map control will usually win that round. When and how you should search, or when and how you should rush is going to vary from map to map, or even lobby to lobby, depending on how the other team is rushing. But it's a skill that you need to develop. There's two ways to get better at doing beginning of the map rushes. The first is you can just try it from trial and error. You're gonna be unsuccessful if you don't already know how to do the rushes, but it'll teach you where on the map you're gonna meet other enemy players who are also rushing, so you know when to start aiming at certain key lines of sight or in certain buildings. You'll get a feel for exactly how far you can push into the map before you have to get ready for a gunfight. The second way is you can just watch someone who's better than you. You can observe how people are rushing in your matches. You can watch professional players, or you can watch your favorite YouTubers. I have plenty of videos on various maps where I'm doing rush routes, and you can try those out and kind of get a feel for how to play them and how they work in your lobbies, because everyone is playing at a different skill level. The better players are going to have to adapt to higher levels of outmaneuvering people who know the standard rush routes, and if you're a lower tier player, the basic rush routes are going to give you a huge advantage, and you should really take some time to learn that. Okay, with that out of the way, let's look a little bit more at each of these playstyles. The first one is the rusher. Rushing players are trying to gain critical map control for their other players. On most maps, rushing typically means using an SMG or a shotgun and trying to maximize your mobility and your kill potential in close range skirmishes. Once map control is achieved, rushers will continue to push toward enemy players and attempt to flank them from their now limited map mobility. Anchors, who are similar to rushers at the start of the match, they will sprint in for map control right behind the rushers to help secure key kills. Anchors don't continue to rush after getting the map control, though. Instead, they're going to hold power positions like buildings, hallways, chokes, or head glitches with mid to long range line of sights. Usually anchors are using an AR or sometimes a sniper for long lines of sight, or if the power position happens to be real close quarters like a building, they might also have a shotgun, but they just don't plan to continue to rush and flank the enemy after getting that power position. The last major playstyle is lockdown, and it's a little bit more vague and not as common. Lockdown players try to force a choke on the enemy's team ability to move where there isn't a natural map choke for an anchor to hold. There's two types of lockdown players in this sense. The first will usually use snipers, but an AR can also fill the role as well. The goal is to hold very long lines of sight or to aim at a very specific area to punish any players that are trying to push through. The second type can be used when you have a numbers advantage over the other team. If your team has 4 players left and the other team only has 2, usually everyone switches gears to a lockdown playstyle holding different areas or different lines of sight to make it easier to figure out where those remaining 2 players are, and then once they're identified, everyone collapses in on that position. It was tempting to put camping as a playstyle, but it's more of an illusion than a real playstyle since anyone can start camping no matter what they're doing 20 seconds before. I do want to touch on camping for a moment though. There's a difference between playing the game mode tactically and camping. Real camping is just sitting in obscure places and just hoping the other team walks in on your location, but you'd lose if they didn't play into your passive plan to surprise them. An anchor who, for example, just rushed mid-map and won control of it, and then holds a line of sight over a likely area that enemies will be forced to move into since they didn't get map control, is not camping. It's playing search the right way. I just wanted to draw that distinction because the term camper gets thrown around so quickly in games when it's really about playing the game mode and outmaneuvering the other team. And that pretty much covers it on general playstyles. Now that you've picked your playstyle and how you want to optimize your weapon loadout, and you want to know how to optimize your weapon loadout for it, let's dive into section 2, perks. So perks are sometimes obvious and non-negotiable for a playstyle, and others have niche utility or are used in response to a specific player or team and how they're playing. Let's have a quick look at the list of all the perks. Because search is a low kill, tactical, single life game mode, many perks immediately become bad choices, so let's go ahead and knock those out. Red is going to be bad for search, yellow will be situational or not always optimal, and green are the ones that are pretty much always high utility and always useful. So in search, you should almost never be running out of ammo. You can often, even if you were going to run out of ammo, you can usually just pick up a gun off of a dead enemy. So scavenger is out, it's not really useful. Kill chain technically can be useful, but using it is a high risk, high reward and hinders your ability to survive or rush with other tier 1 perks. Quick fix will rarely see meaningful results since it's rare to run into multiple enemies in search, where a quicker heal time is going to actually make a difference and save you versus you just dying anyway from that same gunfight. Hardline, like kill chain, isn't awful, but there's better options no matter what your playstyle is. Should you use hardline to try to get the kill streak, 1 less kill in, or just use ghost to not die to a UAV, which will extend your kill streak indirectly, and it's just overall more useful, for example. The final one on red here is point man, and it simply doesn't help your kill streak potential enough. In search, there's only one objective, and the odds of you being the one who gets to plant or defuse simply isn't worth the extra cost added to the kill streaks versus just getting kills. When you use point man, unless you're just getting an insane number of assists, and you have a team that just lets you always plant and you always somehow live to defuse, you're going to be getting the same kill streaks with the number of kills you're going to be getting in the meanwhile, because the point man adds like 150 points usually to a kill streak, and you're generally not going to get enough assists and enough plants or diffuses to make up that extra cost, and it also takes up a perk slot. Moving over to some of the situational perks is Cold-Blooded and Ghost. Both of these perks can be great, but they often are wasted since enemy kill streaks are situational, more so with Cold-Blooded and Ghost since UAVs are common as early as round 2 or 3, but it usually takes a lot more time for Cold-Blooded to get use. Ghost can almost always be used when you're not sure what perk you want or that you need, and I only recommend putting Cold-Blooded on mid-match if someone is likely to be on like a 7 or 8 kill streak, so that they're going to be having something like a VTOL come in, which is where that becomes useful. High Alert is kind of in a strange place. At best, it can help you spot an enemy you didn't look for or that turned a corner right after you checked it, but generally, learning good map awareness makes this perk superfluous. If your map awareness isn't good, aim to use High Alert to learn when and where you aren't looking, then take the training wheels off once you develop the ability to predict where players will typically be on each map. Amped offers very little utility unless you're using overkill or rocket launchers. If you are using one of those two, then it is undoubtedly the best third perk, but it's very it's very one-sided in that regard. You should only use amped with rocket launchers or overkill, really. Spotter is generally not a very good perk in search. If you're worried about things like claymores or bouncing betties, you can just use EOD and not waste a third perk on it. The only scenario I've ever had that spotter was ever worth it was whenever I had a rushing class that had to have double time for timing the rush, and the enemy teams were just spamming claymores and proximity mines in a key building, like Crash, for example, in A-Bomb. That's one example where you might use spotter in response to enemies, but it's very unusual to be going for that perk. It's better to just use EOD if you're concerned with claymores. The last one is Tracker, which is another kind of odd perk, and it does have some niche utility. The fact that enemy players can't see their dead teammates' skulls isn't as useful in search as it is in respawn modes. Good players are going to know where their teammates are at anyway, so it's not that helpful once you're getting better at the game. The footstep tracking is usually hit and miss. While it is helpful for you to be able to see an enemy, to see where an enemy was, the odds of you running into their footsteps before they disappear and then being able to flank them without being detected, like you would need ninja in order to run and chase them down, because if you just chase them down with full footstep audio, you're just going to get killed because they're going to turn around and just kill you around the corner when you're trying to get the kill. So I don't typically recommend Tracker. It can be useful in some cases, but it generally doesn't get much use as you progress higher in skill. Okay, so now that we've narrowed down the perks, keep in mind that certain perks are going to be better or worse just depending on the map you're playing on. Some map rushers may want double time to get to an important area before the enemies can get there. Other maps, rushers might die to spawn nades and they have to run EOD. Or if the run distance isn't long enough, you don't actually get to a key area with double time that you wouldn't also get there with EOD. So it's really map dependent on which one is better in that example. Okay, now we can finally dive into the good perks and talk about when to use them. EOD and double time are pretty much the only useful options for any playstyle. Because the timing and prominence of explosives is map dependent, it's difficult to say which one is best, but generally rushers are going to be using double time, anchors and lockdown players are going to use EOD. Perk 2 is a little bit easier. Restock is very passive and utility driven, so you will not see that on rushing classes, but you could see that on lockdown or anchor classes, depending on what their goals are as far as throwing nades. If they need more nades later, or claymores, you can restock. So it really depends on the playstyle that they're aiming for. Rushing players are going to pretty much always use Ghost, because the last thing you want to do when running in at the beginning of the match is get caught on UAV right when you're about to meet the enemy's players. So rushing classes strictly use Ghost, and then Overkill and Restock typically are going to be seen on anchors and lockdown players, depending on what their goals are. Whenever a player is using Overkill, usually their goal is to not rush because they have low mobility with two weapons, but they're going to try to play two different play styles throughout the match. They might have a sniper and a submachine gun so that they can hold a long line of sight like a lockdown at the beginning of the match, but then they can push into the map once map control is established and play more of an anchor role or even a rushing role at that point. It just depends on what the player is really going for and what each team is kind of doing and reacting to the situation. The third perk is really up to preference. Each one has high utility. Tune-up is good on rushing classes to increase the number of ninja flanks you can do in a match. Shrapnel gives you the potential to kill EOD players without coordination with your teammates, with things like grenades or claymores. It also lets you have more control on certain maps with spawn nading, common routes, which are useful for both rushing and anchor classes. Battle Hardened is kind of a niche perk to use. You only really want to use it if you are playing a map that you know is going to have a preset area that gets stunned. Hackney Yard often has stuns in A building. Shoot House has stuns often around B-bomb. Maps like that you know are likely to have it is when you use Battle Hardened. Otherwise, you want to keep Battle Hardened off and only put it on if you're getting stunned a lot. Okay, so let's kind of summarize everything that I just said in a chart. Rushers, remember, are aiming for close to mid-range encounters. That means they're usually going to use an SMG or a shotgun. They're going to be using double time or EOD, and then ghost, and then tune-up or shrapnel, with a situational battle hardened thrown in there, depending on the map and the players. Anchors are going for mid to long range, usually having an AR or sniper. They usually use EOD. Situationally, they can use double time. They might be using restock or ghost, and they run tune up or shrapnel with battle hardened as a condition, just like the rushing class. Anchors can use overkill. They're just going to be less useful in the initial rush to help your dedicated rushers win that initial battle for map control. But if you can afford to do so, then you're going to have a stronger anchor player with two weapons in those cases. Lockdowns are kind of the wild card. They're going to usually be using overkill, and depending on what their goals are, that's gonna vary from player to player. They're often going to be long range with a sniper, and they're going to be using overkill with a shotgun, with an AR, with an SMG to supplement that sniper rifle. They're going to almost always run EOD because they are not rushing at the beginning of the map. They usually run restock or overkill to have that flexibility, and then they can run tune up or shrapnel. They pretty much never run battle hardened because again they are not the ones rushing in at the start of the match. So now that we kind of had the overlay of the playstyles and sort of the class setups that are optimal for those playstyles, let's go over the equipment options. Okay, so for this section, I'm going to keep this kind of brief and not as in-depth as I did with the perks. I'm just going to list the strongest tactical and equipment here. So you can see it's stun, smoke, and stim for tactical, and it's claymore, frag, C4, Semtex for lethal. Stims allow rushers to get deeper into the map faster, making them extremely useful for playing aggressive. Outside of rushing though, stims are not that useful. You're better off using a smoke or stun grenade instead. Stims don't really offer much utility on the healing side like they're designed to do. They're only really strong for refreshing your tactical sprint so that you can rush harder at the very beginning of a match. The smoke versus stun decision depends largely on the playstyle and the map. For getting map control, some routes may require a stun to lock down enemies from an area. Crash would be an example where you can stun near a building to prevent the other team from getting into A before you do. On many maps, smoke opens up options to maneuver in otherwise dangerous areas to take a shorter path. Shoot house going through mid, you can rush with smoke. You can rush in Arklov Peak through A side. You can flank with smoke. Smoke has a lot of tactical and creative options as well, which lets you use things like thermal. You can smoke a bomb site to safely plant. You can smoke an area to misdirect the enemies from where you're actually moving. The general rule of thumb should be use stim if you're rushing. If there's an area you need to stun, run the stun. Otherwise, smoke is probably the best thing to use. Moving on to the lethal equipment, claymores are usually best used by lockdown players to safely hold their lines of sight for enemy rushers. On some maps, the anchors may also want to use a claymore that has multiple directions to watch, and if the team that you're playing with isn't really helping you cover it, that can kind of help you cover one side of a building while you're watching the other side of a key building. But usually you're only going to see it from lockdown players. Frags, C4, and Semtex can be used on any playstyle, and it's often map and playstyle dependent. All three serve the same role of trying to hit an enemy that's out of your sight. Frags and Semtex have a higher skill cap than C4. It's easier to use C4. C4 can also kill enemies with EOD if it's really close to them, but Frags and Semtex can also be thrown very far for like spawn nading or for controlling movement, whereas C4 is really kind of up close or right around a corner for use. So which one of those is going to be best for your playstyle or what you're aiming to do is going to depend largely on how comfortable you are with each of those equipments, what map it is, how the other players are playing, and things like that. Thermite does deserve an honorable mention as it's the best lethal to use against EOD using riot shields, but outside of that, you shouldn't use any other equipments. So moving on to the next section, let's talk about the Gunsmith. The optimal attachments change often with updates, nerfs, buffs, bugs, etc. So instead of listing what's best at the time of this recording, let's talk about more about why certain attachments are good and why they're used, opposed to just listing out the ones that are currently best. You can always look up what's popular at the time from your favorite pro player or YouTuber if you're wanting to just get the current best thing. I'm just going to go over the main four categories, which are assault rifles, SMGs, shotguns, and snipers. Rushers usually go for SMGs and shotguns, so typically the best build is to go for max damage and range that does not compensate mobility or the aim down sight. You want to give up recoil so that you can be fast and have more range on your gun in case you have a mid-range battle with those weapons usually. Anchors and lockdown players usually have an assault rifle and will prioritize recoil and damage first because they're going to be shooting at longer ranges, so they need more control and more damage range. And then they'll work on their aim down sight speed last. Usually this means that their weapon is going to be a little bit less mobile. They're not going to be using mobile attachments. They're going to be sacrificing mobility to be able to have that range and that accuracy. Snipers are pretty much exclusively made to max out your aim down sight speed, so that you can manage a close to mid-range engagement, since they're already built to do long range. Okay, so now I want to just give a great example of all the playstyles and combinations that I just kind of went over. I'm going to be using an example on Shoot House here. I'm going to show an example rush route with both stun and smoke. I'm going to show anchor examples on both sides of the map, as well as the lockdown position for the sniper, and how all of these things, if you had a coordinated team, for example, where you have, let's say, 3 rushers, 2 anchors, and 1 lockdown player, how they can completely dominate a map compared to people just doing random things without really thinking about it or coordinating with each other. So let's take a look at that. So this is going to be an example of going through mid with smoke. I'm going to use an anchor as the example class. So this is going to be, in this case, an M4 with Galley 6 for movement speed, and then I have EOD Ghost Shrapnel with my smoke grenade. And as soon as the round begins, you just want to throw smoke in there. That'll save you from any snipers that don't have thermal, and then you can flank enemies that are over here. As soon as you hit this wall, the enemies will be hidden about right there, generally. And so you're just trying to control them from pushing in. So let's go to another rush class going another route. Okay, so on this one, I'm using a rushing class with an MP5. This is going to be a stun rush class. The double time doesn't really make a difference on this map because of how short the initial rush is. So we're going to be using stun and battle hardened because people throw stuns in this direction. So as soon as you spawn in, you're going to run over here, throw a stun over the crate. You're probably going to get stunned as well with other people throwing over the crate. And you can either challenge this way, or you can challenge this way. And between this player and the M4 player that's going here, you should have a pretty good chance of gaining control of this side of the map. Okay, so this is going to be another anchor player. This player is going to be going to Scrapyard, and this one's going to be running a stun with Battle Hardened, because on this side you may also see a stun grenade being thrown. So as soon as this player spawns in, they're going to run towards Scrapyard. They're going to throw a stun here, and then they're going to hold this angle to prevent players from running through. Okay, so this is going to be the final example of the lockdown player. This is probably the hardest slot on this map to actually consistently win, because you're going to have to run to this head glitch and beat the other sniper, if there is one, also sniping you. But if you do win, you get pretty solid map control from doing it. In case other players on the other team are using smoke, it's better to use thermal. You can throw your own smoke if no one's rushing in, and then look for the kill, or just hold this line of sight to control the map, and now the enemies can't push through a third of the map effectively. Okay, so now I want to kind of wrap up all the routes that I just went over in game into an overhead view of what's going on. So we spawned on this side and we sent uh, three people to B. We had one go mid, we had two go B in this direction, and one of those was an anchor in green. We had two rushers rush B. We had another anchor go scrapyard, and we had our lockdown sniper take control of mid. And assuming that B side is won, which means that we won map control, which is what I was saying, that whoever wins map control typically will win the round if you're playing properly, if you're actually maintaining and using that map control to your advantage. So let's just say that the offense sent two or three people to B, our two or three people beat their side, and now we have this position with our remaining five players. We have an anchor holding down this line of sight, we have an anchor on this line of sight, we have a lockdown or a long range anchor holding down mid, which effectively cuts off the offense from being able to move out into the map. They're going to either be right here in this corner watching this angle. They might be right here behind the crate. They might be back here or in this building, but they have no way to effectively move forward. And by having this control, now that the anchors and the lockdown players have their lines of sight in place, that opens up the ability for the rushers to actually make a move to push and pinch the remaining players, and they can go all sorts of ways depending on callouts or where they think the remaining players really are left and where they're hiding. But doing this allows the team to maintain map control as opposed to just everyone trying to rush their spawn and hoping to get a kill. Having these critical lines of sight covered is how you win games consistently every time, by playing to your advantages and winning map control. And so I just wanted to have a quick example of those three categories, those three playstyles, and sort of a real example on a great map that really shows off all three playstyles at their best. So anyway, I hope you took something away from this video. Give it a like if you learned something or if you enjoyed the content. Comment below if this is something that you enjoy. There's a lot of depth to cover in Search and Destroy, and I would be more than happy to go into even more things besides just weapon loadouts and playstyles, if that's something that you would be interested in hearing about or learning about. So thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.